So welcome everyone to the May edition of the Finance Committee meeting. On the agenda, we're going to be talking about an understanding of revenue projections, knowing that the Treasurer, Tim Maloney, may not be able to give firm numbers, but at least you can kind of give an insight into how that will work through the summer, and then helping us formulate kind of a third quarter assessment. So it'll be really cool to get those insights. Thanks for coming. Then, as part of the Committee of the Whole meeting where we reviewed, where President Miracle reviewed the audit report, there are some findings that we're going to need to address. Oh, yeah, thanks. Findings that we're going to need to address. Of them was the need to formalize and document a competitive bid process. There's a couple elements that we'll go through, and I think this round is more of like an ideation session to start to document what we would recommend. Then after the president kind of assigns that to us, we'll put that into writing a little bit better. Third on the agenda is something that was brought to our attention from two council members. And that was consideration for Norwood City's ability to fund, administer, and evaluate potential small business startup loans due to COVID-19 financial pressure. And lastly, I'd like a general discussion amongst our committee on the timeline and financial planning review that I just mentioned earlier that I expect to have in the third quarter. So with that, we have the treasurer here. If you want to give a little bit of a report out, I suppose,
sure.
or
yeah,
and then we can kind of just discuss after that.
Good. So I sent everybody a spreadsheet out, and typically I would just run copies and pass them out, but I thought better of that this time, right? So everybody should hopefully has at least looked at that. And really, it's 2 pages, a kind of a summary on top, and some details on page 2, and just like everything else, right, the devil's in the details. And so just a little bit of review. What we talked about the last time was our earnings tax estimate this year was basically flat from last year. So last year we collected $19,816,000, and we're using $19,825,000. So it's basically flat. So one way to look at this, and what I presented to you guys on my email, was let's just compare April actual this year versus last year. And so through the first quarter, you can see that we were ahead $144,000. And I'm not going to go over every single line of this, but through the first quarter, we were ahead $144,000 at the end of March compared to last year. So pretty strong first quarter. In April, we stumbled a little bit, and we're down $59,000 in the month of April. So net, after first 4 months, we're up $85,000 compared to where we were last year. So being ahead 85, we need just over $13 million the rest of the year to meet our projection of $19,825,000. Okay? If you go to the second page and
I had a question before we go on, just on this. Just to understand, I guess, weighting of that timeline. So if they were kind of flat, 19,825,000, 19,816, and it seems like we're ahead, but if I look at just kind of the breakdown, it also looks like the 2020 projections were weighted a little bit differently, I suppose. Like, it seems like it's heavier in the year. Was there a reason for that?
So the way we do our projections month by month is we take a 5-year monthly weighted rolling average. And so we usually look to where January is, February, March, whatever, instead of taking the total amount divided by 12. Okay? So it's just another data point. It says if we have kind of a typical year, we usually collect about 53 or 54% of taxes in the first half of the year, right? Certainly, that's going to move to the second half more since we moved the due date from
I
April to
understand.
July, right? So we know going in, or as we sit today, not going in when we prepared that at the beginning of the year, but as we sit today, we know some of that's going to be collected July the
follow.
15th that we typically got in the first 4 months, right? So I think a fair way to look at this, it would be just compare it to last year. Last year, in 19, as we discussed the last time, there wasn't any real extraordinary events like in December we got a hit because of this, positive or negative. Or
That's what I was
October.
basically asking
Right,
for.
right. So there was nothing extraordinary last year in any of the months. So, if we follow last year, we should be, if you look through April, we should be okay.
Cool.
So we still have some work to do though, right? Okay, so if you look at the second page where there's a little more detail, and I just broke out the total collections into individual, net profit, withholding, right? So withholding, the amount companies deduct or people pay on their earnings in Norwood as we go. Net profit is the 2% that we charge companies on their net profit. And that's typically due April the 15th, just like everybody else's individual. And individuals are those citizens that owe the city money. And you can see through the first quarter, the individuals were down $30,000. The net profit collections, $146, but the withholding was very strong, right, through the first quarter. We were up $321,000 compared to last year. And so that's where the 144 positive came from, those three numbers, when you add those together. In the month of April, though, you can see some bigger swings. And again, mainly due to us moving the due date from April 15th to July 15th. Individuals down just in the month of $120,000. Net profit, another $30,000. But still very strong withholding tax through the end of April collected, and in the month, another $92,000 positive from last year. When you add those numbers up, that's where the negative $58,000 came from that was on the summary page. So when you add the two together, giving us a 4-month look, a third of the year, you can see that individuals down $150,000, net profit $176,000, where withholding is up $413,000.
Did you, excuse me, did you provide this portion of it, like, is there a separate sheet for this part, or is this something?
I can't hear you.
Is there a separate sheet that you sent us that breaks out what we received this year through net profit, or is that, I guess I'm just asking, is that on the spreadsheet what you're talking about right now?
I think this is what I sent you guys, I thought, something like this. No?
I don't have that piece at the top.
Maybe I sent you the wrong stuff, James.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not, I mean,
We were able to follow along on your different, I'm tracking
Okay.
every month and your total year, so I'm getting to the same place.
Yeah, okay.
yeah, sorry about that.
So I'll resend that to you, and
Yeah,
it'll be a little clearer. I apologize for that if I sent the wrong spreadsheet.
no, it could be here. We'll talk about it later. Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
So where we are today is a net $85,000 ahead, right?
Yeah.
But the three components are different. 150 behind in individual, 176,000 behind in net profit, and ahead $413,000 or $413,000. So when you add those up, that's the 85 or 86. So
just a quick thing on that. So you said we're ahead 413,000 on the withholding taxes.
that's correct.
Okay, so that's pretty encouraging.
That's very strong. That's
really encouraging for the future. Even though we know we're going to hit some blips. I mean, that's encouraging for just where the city really was in the beginning
right.
of the year.
I agree. So that's very strong, and I do believe that the 150 behind we are in individuals, and the 176 we're behind in net profit. We should see, I'm hoping, most of that come to us July the 15th, right? So it's just a delay in those two categories because they're based on last year's earnings, not current year earnings, where the the issues we're having has any effect. We might find some of that next year, and I'll talk about that in a minute, right? But that $150,000 and that $176,000 an individual in net profit, I think we'll get that back. You know, and so by the end of July, hopefully we'll be closer to where we were, and that's a good sign for us. The $413,000 in withholding that we're ahead, it's going to be interesting in the month of May and June, July, due to the shutdown, where we stand on all that. Certainly we're going to take a hit for restaurants and bars, but as a dollar percentage, that's not very high, you know, in our city. But you would expect that to go down. The other major employers are still running pretty strong. And again, when the law changed on this, the state of Ohio did issue some guidance that says if you typically work in Norwood, although they didn't single us out, but if you typically work in Norwood, but you're sent home temporarily to work from home, you still pay Norwood city taxes. So, so for those folks, they'll still owe withholding, or I'm sorry, they'll still have Norwood taxes withheld, and we should still get that money. So, you know, I certainly don't have any inside information. From what we can tell, most of our, if not all of our largest employers and largest contributors are still working. You know, you read in the newspaper, you know, the city of Cincinnati projecting 20% less revenue, or Hamilton County, you know, 15–20% less revenue. I'm hoping, and I don't think we're going to approach anywhere near that. Now, I can't forecast the economy once everybody rolls out of this, right? But you know, if everybody comes back and business is relatively the same, yeah, we're going to have a blip, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near the 15 or 20% that other municipalities are talking about. So, you know, is there a reason to change our 19,825 now? Maybe by a few $100,000 or something, yeah. But nothing that, you know, like, oh, you guys better take $2 million out or something like that. Nothing like that. I would ask council, though, to be very cautious these next 60 or 90 days, at least maybe to the end of July, when, you know, we'll have a much better handle on the individual net profit, and a couple of more months under our belt for withholding. So again, I would stick with the 19.8 for right now, knowing we can change that anytime, really, that we need to. But I just ask that we, you know, we watch our nickels and dimes here, probably to the end of July. So, you know, May, June, July, another 90 days. Certainly you'll still get the monthly reports that we provide and all that, so we can kind of see. I always talk about, and I did the last time I was here, taking kind of a long-term approach, right? Let's look at the whole year instead of just 1 month that there might be a blip here or there, and let's not get excited if January's real high or January's real low. What's it going to be for the year? And so I still believe that. But let's use some caution over the next couple of months, and you know, and I think that's the smart thing to do.
I do want to touch on, you started to say 21 potential, the items that would be affected by 21.
Right, so where we'll see that, right, assuming everybody comes back up to normal employment levels, our withholdings should be about the same, but you know, if companies in 2020 are going to make less profit, will come next year's budget, what's due April the 15th, will be a lot less, right? And the same way with individuals, that if they're working less hours in 2020, we're feeling that, that they owe the city, they won't be paying that till next year, if they don't work in the city, right? And so in next year's budget, we'll have to take a closer look at that on, what we think, and probably use some pretty conservative numbers in the individual and the net profit section. And then naturally, when we project 21, we'll have a much better handle on withholding and whether everybody's back to normal employment levels and things like that.
And I think you answered, but just to kind of clarify for myself, folks, if we go through some of the bigger businesses that make up, that third bucket that you were talking about the last time you were on, most of the large companies that are a stone's throw away right here, they are still open, if not remote.
Yes.
And they didn't seem, or at least the news, well, I just did a quick Google, didn't seem like they were laying off with any newsworthy
Certainly their
amounts.
April numbers are right in line with what they were last April and March and February and March, April. We saw no big swings other than bars and restaurants.
What about, and I imagine hotels would be lumped into that too?
Yeah, so, the hotel, we make some earnings tax out of the hotels, right? So if they're renting less rooms, which I know they are, right? So we might feel the pinch also in the hotel tax, that comes directly from how many rooms they rent, right? So, I don't know, Jim, do they pay that quarterly? I think they pay that.
Yes, they pay it quarterly. It was just paid, their second payment, because their first was in January for fourth quarter last year. Their first payment for this year just came in. It was about 25% under projected, or under what it was for the January payment. So that probably represents, for this time frame, I would say their second quarter payment, I'd imagine it's going to be at least 50% or less.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
But then hopefully opens back up again later, but it's paid quarterly.
I actually had a question for Jim. So one thing that was kind of, if I want to track where we have revenue risk, is that at all matched in a reduction in expenses for the same time period? I know that, Clint, for example, Clint Zimmerman, our department head for Public Works, he's had smaller crews working. Has there been a reduction in any of the city's expenses that match some of the, albeit slight, reductions that you've seen in the revenue?
Not for the most part. You've got to consider the majority of the city's expenses from the general fund are personnel-related expenses. And we still have people working, we still have people doing jobs. Some of the larger capital projects that were planned for this year, obviously, are probably being pushed back because of, the shutdown. But our expenses are pretty much on track with where we anticipated they would be, with the exception of some of the large capital expenditures.
So it's fair to say at the moment, slightly minor reductions in revenue might be matched with the reductions in the cash leaving me because of the capital expenditure, and therefore my cash position of that 2.4, 2 point whatever would just be increased at the end of the year.
So where we ended
I'd have even more carryover, I suppose.
at the end of April, our actual cash carryover at the end of April was significant. It was about $5.2 million. Again, this is one of our peaks, and as we look at our cash flow of where are our big expenditure months, where are our big revenue months, they don't always lie.
I understand. Yeah.
And so we've got two triple payroll months that hit us hard, and I believe that's May and October. So yes, we bring in more money revenue in April, but we're going to need some of that in May, as well as some not monthly payments, like every other month, or things that are based like every 5 weeks. Workers' comp payments, as well as some specific once or twice a year payouts. Those are all calculated into kind of the cash flow analysis and looking at month to month where we are. So right now we've got a good cash buffer, but it's going to drop next month and then hopefully come up a little and drop again. But we track that monthly, and that's also followed by the state auditors.
Thanks. Cool.
Good. All right, any other questions?
Not from me, from you, Tim?
All right, and I apologize if I didn't send you the right stuff, and I will this evening.
So you were talking like we're not at the 15 or 20% net loss that some of the cities are. Do you have like a percentage number right now, or is it still kind of too early to tell?
I think it's too early for that. Again, you know, are we going to suffer by $200,000-$300,000? I think that's a possibility, right? So, you know, 10% is $2 million, 1% is $200,000. So are we going to be down, you know, if we're down 5%, that's $1 million, right? So that'll be some serious money if we're down 5%. And so that's, you know, if you look at the numbers right now, we're not down 5%. And in fact, we're over a little bit, $85,000 through April. But I think, you know, May, June, and July, we should just press the brakes a little bit and make sure we're going to be okay.
I have a quick question. So just based on like I mean, you've been at the city now for
Couple of years.
22, 23 years, or, you know, as treasurer, which you have a lot of experience. I mean, would you say now is probably a good time, like if there's positions that we haven't hired, like, I don't know, like let's say we haven't hired a recreation director or something else, do you think now is a good time maybe to try to delay that a couple months, or do you think that you may not take that action if you were in the...
No, I would, those are definitely things I would delay. So, you know, the only way I wouldn't delay that is if council decides, you know what, we're not going to spend in fixed assets what we thought. So, or maybe we'll push that off to the fourth quarter, the fixed asset purchase, and then, you know, you can make some of these hires now. But, you know, if you look not only in government, but if you look in private industry, you read over and over about hiring freezes and no raises and things like that until these companies and municipalities, you know, stand on a little firmer ground. And, you know, I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we don't do something like that, you know? So I certainly think that those kind of decisions that you guys can make that says, hey, look, we think we need this position or we think we need to spend this money, but let's go slow for right now till we're a little smarter. I think that's what I'd do.
Thank you for that.
If I could comment on that too, I mean, you use the example of recreation director, perfectly understandable. Community Senate director, perfectly understandable, to put the brakes on those. But when you're talking about maybe finding an economic development director who can be out there working with small business through these tough times and looking and applying for grants to help our community, I think that's a key position. And I think also when we look at the position of hiring for the health department and a health commissioner, I think that during the time of a pandemic, that's not one that we want to put the brakes on. So a blanket statement of no hire, I think is probably not wise for the city, but I think that looking at each position individually and saying, you know, this is a key one, this is an important one that we should place, and this is one that maybe needs to wait till September or December. But I think there's several positions in the city that, well, there's some that can wait, and I think there's some that would really be important to get into place to utilize the government dollars that are available, that these individuals can be going after and bringing into our community for both the health of our community and our small businesses.
Thank you both.
But I agree with Tim.
We good?
Very much.
All right, guys, thank you.
Thanks. Well, cool. So we're going to massively switch gears. And if you go to the third page, guys, this was nothing more than putting down to paper some of the stuff that I think any of us would do if it was our business, okay? And what we're looking at here, I suppose, for folks outside, is coming up with a competitive bidding and approval process. So this is a requirement from the report that Ken Miracle brought to the committee as a whole. He's likely to assign it to this committee anyway, so starting the conversation now and starting to get the rough idea of our recommendations is smart, because it's going to come our way anyway. I guess the short story is what would fall under the competitive bidding process. And it's really any significant purchase, lease, or obligating scenario that would hold the city financially responsible. There are some exceptions to that, and we'll get to them. One particularly important because it's going to come to light on the next council meeting. But before we get into the exceptions, I think we all kind of, in theory, understand if we're about to spend some money, can we make sure that it's going through a competitive bid process? It's worth noting that a couple of instances that I have witnessed personally or know about it because I saw a bid package. This is happening, I would think, fairly pervasively through the city, but me having, some of us here having limited time being part of the city, you know, we're not going to see all of it. So it's just worth making sure that we're projecting the right framework and structure and mindset around having, Jim was actually just mentioning it earlier, having a set of strong controls in place. So what are the things that we could kind of talk about here? I'll just go through a list of process items, and then I'd like us to have a bit of a discussion on what we might want to be thinking about for recommendations. There should be an approval hierarchy. I imagine this would line up pretty similar to the org structure that the administration has in place, but it's something like a mayor, department heads, city employees, and just kind of running down that, because next in line is dollar thresholds to that hierarchy. And we can talk about what makes sense. We don't need to be having a competitive bid process for $5. Equally, something like $5 million has you know, we want to put a ton of attention on. And so trying to find that step ladder between those two extremes to match that approval hierarchy is necessary. I also had a kind of a subline around what do we expect to see to come to us for council approval. This would be general council approval. This is nothing more than I was talking that in practice, it's around $50,000. I say around because sometimes that hasn't been the case, but you know, we should decide here what we want it to be and then see about putting that in. But $50,000, I suppose, would be a baseline just of historical practice for this group. And then something that's particularly interesting is I titled it award criteria. We, on one hand, would say, go with the lowest bidder. You got 3 bids. You got, one of them was significantly lower than the others, go with that. And I, most of the time, imagine that makes sense. But if the department head is the expert and a specialist, and they see something like best value, longest life, lowest maintenance, and something's pretty close, there are times when we should want to have, or want to be able to empower that leader to maybe not take the lowest price, but maybe the second because of some other award criteria. And with that comes some alternative award basis thresholds. Yep.
And also with that, they would probably have to show their justification on why they went with the next one.
Absolutely, yeah. And so we need to provide them with an opportunity, a structure on how they would go take an exception to the lowest bid mandate that we would provide. So maybe it's, you know, maybe that is where it comes to council if they want to do something over 50,000 that's not on the lowest bid. Mm-hmm. And we'll go through, and don't worry guys, I'm just kind of listing them out for folks on TV. What does the bid process count? 3 has always been something that you see a lot. It's pretty common to have 3 quotes, so that just put that out there as a baseline. Bid timing. We don't want to get in the habit of dragging these things out and to not just have not just to give the impression of strong controls, we also want to give the impression of strong and fast action. So I put on there that the bid process should not exceed 6 months. And this is to prevent just quotes getting stale and maybe no longer invalidate certain quotes that they may have gotten. And I have a point here that says, align to capital improvement plan. This is not always possible, but I'd like us to have in writing that anyone who signs the city up for an expenditure should make a good faith effort, even if we're out of fiscal emergency and this is no longer an FRP requirement. There should be a good faith effort to adhere where possible to line items, even maybe category groupings to the current year's capital improvement plan. I think we all agreed, especially as a committee, that something like Mr. Bonzo's capital improvement plan structure will exist even when we get out of fiscal emergency. So knowing that that tool is out there, let's make sure that the bid process is trying to align to it in a good faith effort. You're going to make a comment?
Nope.
And then lastly is record keeping. How long do they have to keep their bids if someone were to want to go look at them, whether digitally or physically? I threw on there a period of 3 years because I was just looking online for stuff, but you know, I want you guys to comment. And so it's all in front of you. I know folks on TV didn't really see all that, but I really want to open it up to just have a conversation for us line by line, and I'll just start to document the notes that will form, that will later form the response or recommendation that we'll get when we're assigned this by the committee as a whole. So start from the top, guys. Nothing?
I thought John was about to say something.
Yeah. Do you have any comments on it?
Not yet.
Okay.
Let me hear somebody else's, and I'll jump right in. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, I can start, yeah. So what is the, we look at thresholds and hierarchy, so you have like, 1,000, 50,000, 100,000. So right now, what is the threshold where like the city, just by us being a statutory city, we have to go out and get, sealed bids or have to go out and get competitive bidding? Is there a threshold right now?
If it exists, I don't have it. I don't know it offhand. But
okay, no worries.
Jim's here. Well, hold on.
I'm agreeing with Fire Chief, it's 50,000.
Yeah, so it was 50. So it's not just in practice. That's a real number.
That's what we've been utilizing.
Okay, awesome. And then, so it's 50,000, and that means essentially that at that 50,000, we have to advertise bids. Okay. And if it's under 50,000, we don't necessarily have to advertise. Okay, perfect. Just want to double check on that.
Yeah, actually, he helped provide some of that, but it's 307.86.
Gotcha.
As far
didn't-
as your, sorry.
It didn't give a particular number. It just kind of gave some of the language that that you were just mentioning there.
Gotcha, okay. So, this is really a good document, a good place to start, at least to have some conversations. I would like to see when we get things that come to us where like, whether it be a purchase of fire equipment or police cruisers or whatever, I very much want to see it come from, the city administration, and that they are saying this, yes, we want to move forward with this. In the past, it hasn't always been that way. Okay. Finance committee would work directly with the fire and police, which we still can. However, I want to, it would be hard to get an endorsement out of something like if we only have $100,000 to spend on capital expenditures this year just because the budget's not where it was, it's very hard to get a prioritization from the city administration. Council would have to kind of figure out how are we going to spend that money that we have left. And I just want to make sure that the city, and I think the mayor and the safety service director are going to be involved, but I just want to make sure that we have their recommendations when it comes to any kind of budget planning, like they presenting a budget to us and us then kind of working with it versus us trying to create something from scratch and do all the research to do that.
So just so I can make sure I'm writing it down properly, it's not just the individual expenditures after the budget is set. It's right.
Well, yeah, like if we get some department head presenting a bid to it, like saying, hey, we need to go out for bid for this fire equipment. Like I want to make sure that before we as council do that, or before we consider that, like I want to make sure the city administration is signed off on that. And I think right now, looking at everything that's happening, I think that's going to happen. But I think it would be good to note that, though.
Yeah. A lot of this, that's a great
practice.
point. A lot of this is writing down what either has been or likely will happen.
Right.
And so you're dead right to put that in. Yeah.
When you commented on the retention of the bids and stated there's 3 years, the city does have a records retention policy, and there is a records review committee when they go to destroy old records. So I would, if I were you, refer to that as to determine the length that you're going to retain the records.
Will do. I imagine the law department can direct me
Yes.
there? Yeah.
I believe Marcus Patterson also sits on that committee.
Cool. Okay.
I guess another item that I would note, and I talked about at the last council meeting when we were talking about the fire department roof, but essentially I'd like us to not let it be a standard practice to authorize, when we authorize to advertise for bids, to also authorize the safety service director to sign, to approve those bids. Like I'd like it to be at least a best practice for council to then hear what the bids are and for council to then approve it at that point. I think potentially we could put, in some instances, we could maybe put a dollar limit in these ordinances when we're putting it out to, well, in the ordinance, when we're going to advertise for bids, about what council might be willing to let the safety service director just approve, especially in an emergency standpoint. But maybe that's not a good practice either, because if these people that are bidding get a hold of the ordinance and know like what, I don't know. Either way, I don't know what a great practice is, but I know that the practice that seems to be the best in my head is for council to come back and then approve once bids are put out, especially over the 50,000 limit, that we then come back and approve it, because we might have in our head that we only want to spend, or finance committee might have in our head, we only want to spend $100,000 on the roof. That's what we kind of budgeted, and then we also budgeted $20,000 to fix the apron. If this bid comes back $120,000 and the city administration just decides, well, we're just going to use it all on the roof, and
We've kind of already gone down a road of two.
right, and we don't have a way to, we don't have any checks and balances on that at that point. Now, again, that's not, that scenario is not going to happen right now, but I'm just imagining down the road, I just would like to make sure that council has that protection. And I don't want to see us, like, maybe there's a different mayor one day, or a different whoever. I don't want to see us go and then change policies because of them, and then it looks like, there's just politics are being played. I think we should do it right at the beginning, no matter what.
So to say it back to you, slight mindset shift in that our council approval or council evaluation of the process should occur post-bid, not the kind of a current way of approving a administration member like the safety service director to enter into a bid process.
Correct, yeah. So we should not approve the bid to be approved. We should not allow the administration to just, no matter what the lowest dollar amount is, to just approve it. We should come back and give our blessing.
Did you want to put a threshold on that?
I would just
You
think
would say if the bid is less than X amount of dollars, the safety service director can do it. If it exceeds this amount, then all bids should be reviewed.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I would say that I would just do the latter. If it exceeds like $50,000, then council should not preemptively approve it before the bids actually come in. Or if the estimated cost exceeds 50,000.
I was thinking along the lines of, if council budgeted $100,000 for a roof, and it then said the safety service director could enter into the bid process for replacing the roof for up to, and may approve up to $100,000, or may approve up to $75,000. And then that way, if it's higher, they have to come in.
Do you think that hurt?
Might just smooth the process, but
I don't think it, do you think that there's any way that could hurt us in the bid process, in the sense of if somebody knows that, or not really, because they're still competing with the other people bidding? That's like, okay. So yeah, I mean, that's an option as well. And I would have felt better, if that was in there, so.
Yeah, I think that gives us a little bit of wiggle room and play to not slow the process too much and have to wait for the next council meeting to get our approval. I like that idea.
So the way I would word that in my head, and it might be worth taking a few stabs at this, but it's almost like the first bullet would be the process should be evaluated by council post-bid. And then the second one be, unless we as a council agree to allow the, in this case, safety service director or a member of the administration to enter into the bid process for a particular number that has, let's say, it matched to the capital improvement plan, and if they were to go below it, then that would kind of circumvent the line above it.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. I'll kind of type this out for everybody so we can all see it.
I have one.
Yeah.
So like we're talking about a good faith effort must be considered and here where possible line items and that. So like just, I'm gonna use Parks example because we have a lot of line items, right? So like say we have a project and it goes a little over what we're hoping, and that's obviously gonna take away from somewhere. So by good faith, do you mean like, well, we can't do everything, you know, say like Marsh Park needs some stuff and they got 3 things listed. Well, we can't do everything ever. We can get this one thing done now as well because we went over on these items.
That's exactly
kinda what you mean?
that's exactly
Okay.
what I was trying to say, and because every
Like we're not wiping total projects out. We're doing what we can.
yeah, I mean. We kind of stressed it, we as a group and me specifically.
Yeah.
Every year that goes by, I want the capital improvements plan and the budget that we go through, even outside of the fiscal emergency, to really detail out our strategy for the year. And it's a collective process that we all understand what are the things that we want to accomplish and hold council, the administration, all of our city, accountable. What are we saying we're going to do this year? And so that's what the intent of those documents are. And so the intent of that line item is say, if that's where we head and we get better and better and better about understanding our strategy, then let's make sure we're getting better and better and better at making sure our controls match that strategy. So.
Yeah, and that's gonna be kind of like loose, like you said, just with the best we can.
With the best you can.
Eventually, maybe get to where it says boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now if I could just piggyback on Mr. Kelch's point there. I mean, to me, good faith effort, there's going to be some projects that we're probably not going to do because something comes up, an obstacle came up that we can't get them done, or there's going to be other projects that the dollar amount's going to go over because change orders, or just it wasn't, when we were doing our estimation, we didn't know that there was going to be certain other things that were going to have to be done. So to me, it's just knowing that the administration is going to, they're going to plan for things and spend money on things that we, as an administration and the council, approved with the capital improvements plan, not just completely disregarding it and going off and doing whatever without consulting council. I think that would be
And I think too in our committees that where we're spending some money and we're doing projects, we'll talk, say, hey, this is going to take away from this, and kind of get that whole group acceptance or okay or feedback on that item. And I think the route he was mentioning, and I was kind of hoping it would go towards, rather than a clear cut, well, that's not on the line item.
Yeah, I mean, it's never going to, I don't think it ever gets to perfectly that level, but I think it would just, if we're all trying to get closer to that mindset, then it's going to be good. It's going to be good for the city.
Keeps everything in check.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Well, if that's all, I'll kind of type up a draft and email this group, and nothing's written in stone because we haven't even been asked to do it yet, but we're just preparing for the inevitable assignment that our president's probably going to pass down to us. So that's what I wanted to get out of this. So thanks, guys. Cool. A nice segue here was we were kind of putting together a competitive bid process, but we didn't really talk about exceptions that much. One major exception, because it's going to come to light at the next council meeting when we look at the new fire engine. I know that the chief's right behind me, so you can kind of correct me or step in at any time. You don't need to raise your hand, you could just talk. It's something called the Joint Cooperative Purchases process. The short version of this is where there is an immediate need, damage to the infrastructure, or public safety. You can circumvent any competitive bid process rate requirements that were to exist, the over 100,000 mark that we were talking about earlier. And in fact, it's not just that you can circumvent, it's actually that you can enjoy certain benefits that exist amongst cooperative purchasing or joint purchasing. For example, with this fire truck that we'll see, I think it's HGAC buy, but it's in my notes somewhere. HGAC buy. Yeah. That actually has beneficial terms like discounted, or in some cases waived transportation fees, lower maintenance agreements. Some of those maintenance items are even waived. And so we as a city of Norwood, when we go to purchase these major items like a fire engine, which won't come good until '21 anyway, we're not going to get 3 bids. We're actually going to go through this program that has done some of that work for you, and they're going to get even better because they're kind of locking down certain advantageous terms. So, yeah, that's just to point out that the fire engine that we're going to see here in 2 weeks or a week and a half falls under that, and it's just worth noting, well, hey, you guys just got done talking about a competitive bid process, and this seems like you didn't do it. So that's why, I suppose. Any other color you wanted to give? Yeah.
Good evening. So one of the things you really want to think about in terms of a competitive bid process is it's a little antiquated system. What I was explaining to Mr. DiNardo was typically what you see now is most durable goods and equipment you can purchase on a joint purchase account, whether it's a state bid process or GSA schedule. However, services like construction, paving, road salt, that kind of stuff, and road salt might even be state bid nowadays, I'm not sure. But typically services you need to bid out. Equipment and durable goods you can usually find on the schedule. What's nice about that is the bid process is very expensive. When you talk about advertising the Inquirer, it's quite pricey for governments to do that. The time to actually compile a bid document, so the fire engine spec that we did is about 100-something pages. Well, you have to delete anything that's manufacturer specific, or you can claim an exception. So it is a time-consuming process. So it makes it difficult. I couldn't remember the last item that we bought at the fire department that went out on a bid process because we use the state bid purchasing process primarily. The ambulance we just bought, state bid. The pickup truck was state bid. So turnout gear we buy, state bid. So most we find within the city is most of the stuff that is equipment-based, durable goods, you won't even have a bid process to.
And I think another benefit for our planning purposes, and I'm kind of looking at you, Jim, is that you kind of know pretty well in advance about what you want to put in there when you're rolling up your budget because, well, I know what other cities have done and I know what the going rate, I suppose, is.
Yeah, basically, the state or other large conglomerate of different groups has done all of the work of the bid process that you're creating. And so that's what's nice about, which is probably why we haven't had a detailed written process in quite a while, is because the majority of things that we do is always on one of the state lists.
Yep, I was going through some of the items, and it's basically any of the material stuff that's material significant, not material. Any of the materially significant items that we saw in the budget seem to fall under those exceptions. The immediate need, public safety, communication, network, those all, they had you can see that they have lists basically of bullets of things that you could probably successfully and easily argue would fall under a joint cooperative purchase agreement. So there are benefits to it. That doesn't, in my mind, at all go against or contradict the need for some of our more day-to-day operations that do cost more than $50,000. We have, at the Parks Department, a pretty aggressive parks campaign over the next 3 years. In the streets, we have a pretty aggressive streets campaign. And not all of these are going to fall under joint cooperative purchases. So as those pick up, so does the need for us to build this this set of rules out.
I think a lot of the park stuff's going to be coming in on around under 50, so it's going to be piece by piece.
So, cool. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
So that's all I had on that particular item. Any other comments, guys? You good? Cool. Switching gears. The next item was brought to me by Councilman Kelch and Councilman Dracy. I summarized kind of their communications and emails into a sentence, so please correct if it's not fair. Consider the City of Norwood's ability to fund, administer, and evaluate potential small business startup loans due to COVID-19 financial pressure. before I kind of go into what I wrote down, what I talked about with some other folks, you want to give kind of a brief idea of what the intent was and what you were hoping to see?
Yeah, I mean, so Councilman Tracy would have a little bit more in depth to say. He can't be here tonight. So what we kind of wanted to do is just find a way to help some of these smaller business, mom and pop shops, and that might be struggling more than, you know, the larger businesses for this. And within Norwood, just to help them grow from the COVID stuff. And also, it's a little deeper now. I don't know if you had anything more to read. It goes a little deeper than that, as far as not just COVID relief.
No, I want you to just, keep explaining.
Yeah, so we thought it'd be a really cool idea for the city to be able to, and obviously that would have to be next year, probably, I believe, right?
So that's what actually, I didn't really know that. I was just wanting you to kind of give.
Yeah, so we're still looking at this, but just, you know, starting with like 20,000, where we can give like small $5,000 loans or $10,000 loans to some of these businesses to expand, to grow, to get more revenue brought in by their business. You know, we had a business up here, Cappy's, who was talking about, well, money is tight, I didn't have a lot of money to do some of these repairs. I think it would have significantly helped them, you know, smaller businesses like that want to make these repairs or expand or add things that they can bring in more employees, more revenue, and kind of help on the economic development side, as well as offering like a low interest payment for these loans. And that money coming back into that loan program to grow it. And obviously we wouldn't want to see it just sit there and not be used. We want to see it used so that we can grow a little bit year to year and help more businesses that are in need. And yeah, we just thought it was like a pretty cool idea we wanted to bring to this committee to talk about, to help shape it and kind of hopefully make it possible in the future.
Yeah. So the intent was to have like an interest basis, right?
We spitballed low interest to no interest.
A couple challenges that had to be kind of thought through, I suppose, some of them bigger ones. We are in fiscal emergency, so I think I heard you say 2020, 21. I mean, I think it just comes completely off the table until that we get out of fiscal emergency.
Yeah.
So.
And I can understand it because like changing appropriations, stuff like that, and we're talking about possibly losing a little bit of income as well. So yeah, that's reasonable.
So kind of that's the biggie. But it's good to think about these things ahead so you can start to build them out, because you'd have a table 2 years out, I imagine.
Yeah.
We also aren't currently able to offer an interest-based facility. Basically, there are a lot of regulations, and I can let Jim talk in a second, but there are a lot of regulations around what, I imagine Jim can talk in a second, but there's a lot of regulations around how and who can lend out money. My understanding, though, is it's not impossible, but it just might have to change up some of the idea that you had. Instead of kind of like a loan function, maybe you kind of tried to set up like a grant search or something like that.
Yeah.
Like go down existing routes a little bit better.
Yeah.
Just because I think I think it's awesome, but the road that we might face as a city, both from, well, we can't even talk about it now, to 2 years from now, can we try to, open up the ability to lend? That's a hard road, and it might be easier and more effective in the near term to search grants. I'm not trying to kill an idea. It's just trying to be realistic about what we can do. But I think it's pretty awesome that you're thinking about it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it was just something just to let the small businesses know that we're here. We want to help. We want to see them succeed. Obviously, we don't want them to fail in Norwood. We want them to stay in Norwood and grow that success here as well.
I would ask Tim and Jim are here. I'd love to hear their comments, both on the ability to fund and can we do this anyway.
Well, number one, at this time, while we're in fiscal emergency, not anything from the general fund.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, as a qualifier, long-term, this is a good idea from the standpoint of creating revenue streams that can be used to help small business. And that is really a major function of the Economic Development Office or Community Development Office, which is one of the people that, hopefully we'll hire sometime later this year. That individual then's responsibility would be to look into state and federal grants that are available and outside funding sources to bring them in and work with the local business owners, and either the city collect money and disperse it in grant form, or whatever the restrictions of how that grant money can be used. We've had an office that's functioned to some extent like that in the past. As far as loans go, that's probably not something that the city would get into, just because we're not a bank.
Yeah.
And the state and federal government strongly regulate how loans are handled. I know larger municipalities like Cincinnati has established programs with outside funds and committees established for reviews for loans. I mean, it's like getting a loan from a bank. And for our size, you know, we might be better focused on, once we get the staffing in place, to work with them directly on your ideas and build this into what kind of program do we have and how can we develop this over the next few years to help the local communities. And really, I think the big key of that is going to be having an office open that goes out and gets to know all the business owners.
Yeah.
And especially the small business owners, and is that point of contact for the city, and then finding out what ways the city can help them. But I think that's, you know, once that position gets filled in place later this year, I strongly encourage you working closely with them. Hopefully, both of your enthusiasms will build off each other and make something like this work in the future.
Yeah.
I had a question on I wanted to be more clear around around the grant and the loan, and because I think you said them both in that kind of explanation. In my head, it's the interest part that's the issue, and but then you kind of talked about if we could develop a grant. That actually, I didn't really think of that out enough. Could you kind of expand on that part? Or are you saying we could actually, I'm wrong, and we could actually build an interest base?
So it is possible to build loans, but that is an extensive process to go through to be able to do that. And that's really beyond my knowledge as to how that process works. I know that other municipalities do it, but you're usually talking much larger amounts of money than we're talking about. And, you know, it's this whole idea of, you know, how much your control costs are for a program versus what the financial benefit of the program is. Whereas if we have people in the city that are going out and actively helping businesses utilize state and federal loans just as a advisory position, or the city apply for grants that it can use and decide to, depending on the restrictions of the grant itself, use to bolster small business within the community.
Yeah,
I think
that's what I was about to ask you before. Are you saying it could be easier to do through grant funding from us and passing those benefits on to qualifying businesses? And because that's what I wrote down with a question mark, and I think that's what you meant?
Yes, if those grants can be found, but again, that's going to take research from the people that'll be doing this. But I think money's out there, and especially at a time like this, there is funding that's available, and just getting somebody with enough expertise to be able to tap into those resources is key. And then again, we wouldn't be touching the general fund; it would be operating through other special funds in the city, and wouldn't fall under the blanket of fiscal emergency.
I didn't ask you before. Did you, everybody?
Well, I was just going to note on this that I think that we potentially could, if there was a community development corporation in the city, or somebody, a group that we partnered with, I would think that potentially we could utilize them as well to help administer a program like this if it was something that was important to the city, and that would take a lot of the administration off of the city and let a community development corporation, who these are the kind of things that they do, let them do their expertise. And maybe that's HCDC or maybe that's somebody else, but it could be an option of how that could get done in the future without us having to get certified as, you know, a lender.
I think all those resources are things that once we establish people within the city that starts working with those companies and working with the small business here, you know, I think there's a great deal of potential for growth in that area of working with our businesses.
Thanks, man. Love bringing it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just for discussion, help
Cool.
mold it and build it.
Okay, and the last item on the agenda is more, it's an FYI at this stage because I think I'm still figuring out how it will take place, because I know some parts of it will. I just talked about how when we set out in the first quarter, we said not only are we going to do this incredible amount of effort and partnership with the administration and the big three, fire, police, public works, to come up with the plan in our budget, we wanted to make sure that on the third quarter, 6 months later, we were evaluating our performance against that with those same stakeholders or developers. And so I think the best way to go about it is kind of have a first round review soon after July. July is particularly important for a number of reasons. Some things to rattle off are Tim felt like he would have a lot clearer understanding of our revenue positions after July, because some of those things are on a lag, like he said. I think we'll get a really strong ability to understand what we're going to be spending our money on. Right now, I think we've, as a city, are kind of frozen a little bit on all of our expenditures. We saw that in our communications with the park. I'm looking at Chris because we just spoke to John and Clint recently. And that was just a small example, and they're going, yeah, we're itching to kind of get back going, but for a little while we haven't done anything. So, or had to limit what we worked on, and so they couldn't get as aggressive as they meant to from the outset. So let's evaluate our ability to execute on that. And so probably soon after July, I'll kind of have a first pass at rounding those folks together. And then I wanted, very intentionally, the Finance Committee to be talking about that review. So I'll go to the big three and the administration, mayor, auditor, treasurer, and do that first pass. But then I really want us as a group to be asking ourselves, are we performing against plan or against expectations that we had for ourselves? And knowing that we probably won't in some areas, some good, some bad, what are we going to do about that? So that's the evaluation that I expect to have probably the end of August. I'm just kind of setting the tone that we're going to be doing that first quarter and third quarter every year.
Is this more like a, hey, let's kind of a huddle to see what track we're on, or more of a...
That's exactly right. Yeah. It'd be kind of, this is what we expected to have happened, some of the assumptions behind it. Then we're going to get the assumption owners, Tim, Jim, the big three, and kind of talk to them about it, really, and say
biannually?
Yeah. So that's kind of just making good on a promise I think we set for, a challenge we set for ourselves in the first quarter as a committee. So that's just the FYI, really. That's the big agenda items I had. Any other?
Yeah. So I would like to note, if we could, on our readout, I guess, of the committee or the committee report. So we did hear from both the treasurer and the auditor today that the city probably should be looking at, evaluating open positions and determining if filling the opening position right now would be, vital importance. So I think the two examples were health commissioner and economic development director. I mean, those two seem like, pretty important positions. But I would like to make a recommendation that we ask in our report out, ask the administration to evaluate open positions and potentially pause hiring for some of them until we at least can learn more about where we're going to be.
Well, I mean, I kind of agree with James here a little bit, but I would also like that, and maybe like ask them to evaluate open positions and see what they think is mission critical versus the ones that can wait, and maybe start the process there to get pool candidates and start going through interviews.
Yeah, I'm trying to word up that, because I don't think anyone was in conflict of the intent, but I want to just make sure it's presented carefully and correctly. And that was to evaluate where not an essential hire, whatever essential is to the administration, to delay for a
I like
particular
the-
period, like a quarter?
I like the mission, I actually like the mission
Yeah,
critical.
more
I
mission,
like
not like, oh, you're not
wording.
essential, but we
and I'll
need it
just-
now versus later.
And I'll just go further. I mean, so essentially there could be areas in the city where, the workload has been reduced, or there could be just opportunities where we don't have to hire somebody at this exact moment. And if we don't, we probably should delay because we don't know what the future brings. I mean, hotel tax, we get, I think around $300,000 a year in, and I think we can pretty much reasonably assume that the last 3 quarters of the year are going to probably be 10, 20, 30% of what we would normally do. And there's other areas too where we're going to see significant drops. So I think if we can be proactive, that was the intent of that request.
Understand. Y'all kind of happy with what I write here?
Yeah.
I'll have you guys all sign.
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that's fine.
So. Any other items?
Not for me.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. That's it.
Perfect.